What's up, guys? Thanks for coming out. This is our second meeting. Super excited to have you all here. Tonight, Mr. Trout will be presenting a little bit about the LSAT. Becca's going to come up and introduce him in a minute, but I'm just going to pray to open us up tonight, so if you'll join me in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing together this group of students and faculty. Please help the information that is presented tonight to be helpful, to be beneficial to everyone who hears it, and just help Mr. Trout be clear in his speaking. In your name we pray. Amen.
Hi guys, thank you again for coming out. I hope you can all find something super helpful to take with you. So we're privileged to have with us one of our very own faculty members, Mr. Trout. A little educational background is he has his BA in History and Political Science as well as a Master's in Curriculum and Instruction from PCC. He did score a 162 on his January 2021 LSAT, so very impressive. And one of his fascinating facts or hobbies is that Mr. Trout can juggle and ride a unicycle.
I'm glad I got invited.
Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Trout.
Oh. The most relevant fact was definitely that last one. So, good balance and juggling skills will serve you well in the LSAT. So, yeah. Well, I'm glad to be here. It's good to see. Actually, it's a good group that will come out here to. Maybe you're considering law school. Maybe you're going all the way for it. Dr. Reese, did you have a little bit of a presentation before this? I know you had some slides.
I didn't know if Will was going to walk through those now or at the end, or
I was going to do those at the end.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Let me skip ahead then.
Yeah, you jump past that.
Those are at the end. All right.
Okay.
So let me just move here to my specific ones.
Try not to hit the button that says nuclear detonation.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will try to avoid that one. All right. Okay. There we go. All right. So, we have a somewhat smaller group here, so we can kind of keep things informal. And by the way, I got a 162 on the LSAT. It's not fantastic, and I hope actually all of you beat that score, right? So I think that you can. One of the things about the LSAT is it's all going to depend on the person, right? A lot of it depends on where your benchmark is and where you can go. But we'll kind of cover just a little bit here at the beginning, what's a good LSAT score and where to go from there. But there's been some PCC students that have made it into the 170s. I hope that's the case for you. But if not, LSAT's just one piece of the puzzle. But we want to talk a little bit about preparing for it. One of the reasons why I want to set this up is because when I approached the LSAT, I wasn't a pre-law major, so I didn't have the wisdom and experience of all of Dr. Reese's classes prepping me for that. And by the way, that turned out to be disastrous for me because I didn't realize how big of a challenge the LSAT is. Because one of the things about the LSAT is it is going to take a lot of your time, but the good news is it is a beatable test. Okay? This is not something where you say, my IQ is just simply not high enough. You can raise your score. And I've seen it countless times, and I've done it myself. I've raised my score by over 10 points on the LSAT. It's very doable. It's just going to take some time, some grit. All right? But the good news is it's doable, but it's going to take some work. All right. So first of all, what is the LSAT? Hopefully you guys know what it is, but just in case, it is the law school admissions test, and it probably is, out of all the graduate school tests, probably the most important. A lot of grad schools, if you're going in, they may require the GRE, they may not. In fact, some law schools, by the way, are actually accepting the GRE. They're few and far between, but some of them will accept it. But the law school admissions test is very unique in the fact that it is a critical piece of your application process. And it's one of the reasons why so many prep test courses have been designed for the LSAT, because it can actually be more influential than your GPA. And it's one of the few tests that can do that. A lot of other master's programs, they're going to look at your GPA, they're going to take a holistic approach. Law schools, for the longest time, they just looked at your LSAT and your GPA, and you'd almost get admitted just on that basis. Now, I think some law schools are shifting away from that, but the LSAT is nothing to sneeze at. It is no joke, all right? So it is a primary factor for admission. By the way, just as a quick resource before we go in, I have found this website to be extremely helpful to start benchmarking where you are as far as numbers for the LSAT. And that's a place called Law School Numbers. How many of you have heard of this site? Okay, so if you have journeyed into the realm of the LSAT, you have probably stumbled across this site. I love this site personally because students will go and input their own information, and then they will compile data and charts, and they'll start to tell you where you're on, what kind of scholarships you could potentially get at various schools, and you can really start to see where you're stacking up and get somewhat of a general idea of where to apply and what to start looking at. So here's an example. By the way, I pulled up Regents. I know a lot of students are very interested in applying to Regent. Now these are self-reported numbers, but they seem to be pretty accurate when you go through them. Let's see. And yeah, Dr. Reese, you have a laser pointer on here too for the PowerPoint. That's good. But I pulled up a few numbers here. So for example, LSAT matters for, the LSAT score is going to mean different things for different schools. Okay? And so one of the things that you'll want to do is when you're looking at various schools to find out their LSAT median, because that'll give you a good idea of where you're sitting. But for example, here is Regent. Okay? So here is this student. They have a 158 LSAT and a 3.17 GPA. But look at how much scholarship they're getting. Right? Look at the money they were offered. $101,000 to go to Regent. Right? That's pretty much a full ride. But they have a 3.17 GPA. Right? You might be asking yourself, well, is that a competitive GPA? It can be. It's not a bad GPA. But a lot of law students are going to have higher ones. But because his LSAT is above Regent's median LSAT target range, he's going to be offered significant scholarships for that. Okay? So that can show you how much an LSAT score can do for you. You see this student down below here, he got a 158 and a 3.72. He says $36,000 a year, but if you look at that, he's probably meaning per year, right, which comes out to about $108,000. But you can see there, right, it's worth a lot of money. All right, take a look here at FSUs. Okay? I'm just going to be brief on this, but I just want you to see this. By the way, this shows you how important GPA is and LSAT is. Okay? So I made a line here. I just did this myself. But you can kind of see how the numbers are boxed in. Right? Once you hit a certain point with the LSAT, they'll accept you. But not for GPA. So take a look at this. This person had a 4.0 GPA, but they got rejected because, let's see, where is it lining up here? They had about a 148 LSAT. Someone with a 4.0 GPA got denied Florida State University because their LSAT was not good enough. So you can see that. There is only so far this will take you, and you can see the line starts to come down. Now, take a look at this step. These people had a 2.2, 2.3 GPA, but because they got a 160 or above, they were accepted. Now, there could have been other things in their application that helped them out, but you can see there how that line works. Right? A lot of times what's going to happen is they're going to take your application, they're going to look at your numbers, and they may not even read your statements. If you're not fitting around the numbers, they might just throw you right in the trash. Okay? That's not to be rude, but that's how a lot of law schools are getting. They could get 10,000 applications. They don't have time to read all of your personal statements. They're going to see where your numbers are tracking and then decide from there. So, this shows you the power of the LSAT. It's important. Your GPA matters, obviously, as well, but a good LSAT can overcome a bad GPA. So, what does that mean? If your 4 years haven't been the greatest, you can have resurrection on one day. For just 2.5 hours, you can get into the law school, right? You can get into a good law school. All right, anyways. By the way, FSU is a top 50 school. So I think the rankings came out, they're ranked 48th. And even if you had a 2.2 GPA, if you got a 160 or above, you have a chance of getting it. Right? So there's hope in that. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the LSAT. LSAT format. Okay, so this one's interesting. Normally it's been done in person, the LSAT, 5 sections. By the way, I've actually taken it officially in the 5-section format. I took that a couple of years ago. I didn't study for it as much as I should. I got, I think, a 158 or a 159 the first time, which is unfortunate because I actually benefit from the in-person LSAT, and I'll talk about why. The LSAT's changed a little bit, and this is good to know because there's some changes coming up with the LSAT that you want to track. The in-person was 5 sections. You had 2 with your logical reasoning, 1 for reading comprehension, and 1 for logical analysis, and then 1 experimental that was just a random of each. And they used that experimental section to further test questions for the future. So you didn't know which one, right? They would just throw it in there. But now, students, and by the way, LSAC, the institution that puts out the LSAT, says it's closed until June of 2022. Okay, so that's when we can expect to start going back to the in-person format, at least according to them, because of COVID. The LSAT Flex is what's been currently being used. That's only 3 sections. That's not very long, right? 3 35-minute sections. Okay, it's less than 2 hours. And it's fast. It is a sprint to get through, but it's nice. But I'm not sure how many of you will actually take the LSAT Flex. Why? Because LSAC has announced that it closes June of 2021. More than likely, if you are taking the LSAT, if you're not taking it here until June of 2022, you're going to take it in the online version, which is 4 sections, which they're offering from August 2021 to June of 2022. What this means is you have 1 logical reasoning, 1 reading comprehension, and 1 logical analysis, as well as 1 experimental section. So it's still the same format as the Flex as far as scoring goes. It used to be that logical reasoning counted for 50%. Now it's been reduced to a third. It's worth 33%. Okay, so that has changed some of the ways that the scores break down. So now each section for the LSAT is even. By the way, this should also change how you study, because a lot of prep books were designed for the old format. They really hammered home logical reasoning because it was worth 50%. Now it's only worth 33%. Okay? So those are some things to know. You don't want to over-prepare for logical reasoning because that's how most prep books have prepared you in the past. You're going to want to study each section equally and probably a little bit more emphasis on logic games, but we'll talk about that. Right? So beware of the emphasis and know which version you're taking so you can adequately prepare. Right? If you're going to run a marathon, you don't prepare by running only 10 miles. Right? You're going to run the full distance, sometimes even a little bit more. Okay? So you want to know what your section is so that you can prepare adequately coming up. So find out where your target range is. Okay, so how do you start? First steps. Number 1, establish a baseline score. This is easy. This is, I hope, relatively panic-free. Here's what you want to do. LSAT actually offers free practice tests. You can go in and take one right now if you want to, if you want to endure torture. I know that Regent offers them as well. That's a great opportunity because they're going to force you to put you into a testing environment. By the way, take this seriously. When you establish your baseline score, go in there and act like you're taking the LSAT. Don't goof off. Don't kind of like play around. Set the timer. Take it in the time frame and see where you arrive. Right? So take an LSAT. That's the first step. By the way, you have free ones. I'll put one out for you, and they'll even time it for you. So go ahead and start there. Okay? Once you've established that, all right. Let's say you're a 150. Now, if you're a 150 for your baseline score, potential means that most students can, if they're really pushing their max potential, can go by 10 points or more. So that means your target score could be in the 160s, right? You could even go higher. Some people have raised it 20. That's tough, but it's possible. But first, establish the baseline score. Don't start studying a bunch. Take the test right off. Establish the baseline score, then establish your target score. What are you working for? This helps, by the way. Research shows that if you set a target, your brain starts orienting around achieving that goal. Don't just keep it nebulous. I just want to do as well as possible. That's fine, but try to set something. I'd really like to get a 163 and then shoot for that. Okay? Because that will start orienting you. Well, would a 163 person have missed this many questions, right? You'll start orienting yourself to get to that goal. Okay? All right, so those are the first 2 steps. Then establish a schedule. I'm trying to keep this broad because when you get into the nitty-gritty of the LSAT, it gets complicated, all right? And so we'll try to cover a little bit of that today. Let's see. Yeah, I want to give time for question and answer because I think it'll be good. We've got a small group here, and I think the more time we have to answer questions and do that, I think we'll be good. But establish a schedule. First of all, pick an LSAT date. By the way, when picking an LSAT date, I would recommend giving yourself at least 3 months minimum for study. This is a big mistake that I encountered when I first went in to take the LSAT. I didn't have Dr. Reese's pre-lab courses. I didn't realize how much work it took to prepare for the LSAT. This is not like a history test. All right? You can't prepare for 10 hours, even if you study that long for a history test. All right? This is not something you can do in 10 hours. By the way, 3 months, 150 hours at least minimum. This is going to take some serious time and effort. If you want to reach your max potential, let's say you get a baseline of 153, and you're like, hey, that gets me into the law school I want to go to, you can do that. But if you want to reach your potential, you're going to need to put in probably at least 150 hours or more with 3 months of study. Okay? So, don't study too hard. What do I mean by this? So I just said, you're going to have to study like 150 hours. The LSAT, for anyone that has taken it or has studied for it, wrecks your mind. Okay? How many of you know what I'm talking about? You've studied for a good amount of time. Will, do you know what I'm talking about? All right. You know exactly what I'm talking about. What I mean by don't study too hard is I know some students are like, I'm going to study 8 to 10 hours a day. That's impressive if you can pull that off. And I'm talking about in the summer. They don't have any job. They don't have any schoolwork. You can try that. I have found that I started maxing out at around 5 hours. 5 hours and my brain started to smoke. Like I can see it coming out of my ears, right? I have to wave it, shut off the fire alarm, right? Get the fire extinguisher out. It's heavy on your logic. And so you're going to feel depleted. By the way, studies have shown, this is really interesting, chess players lose weight when they're playing. Thinking causes you to burn calories. In fact, one study, and this sounds insane to me, I'm not sure how true it is, but nevertheless, they did a study. Chess players, when they were playing on the Grandmaster level, were losing 6,000 calories a day playing chess. Now, I don't think you're going to be losing 6,000 calories studying the LSAT, but I will tell you this. I became hungry, and all I had done is sit in a chair and study the LSAT, right? Get some fruit snacks on hand, all right? But take time. If you try to rush this, well, I'm going to study in 6 weeks and get this done. I'll just study 10 hours a day. Be careful. Burnout is real when it comes to this test. It's like doing heavy math, right? That's what a lot of this feels like. So be prepared. Could you do Algebra 2 for 6 hours a day? If not, right, you might want to scale it down to reasonable expectations. Start early, start often. That's the best way to be prepared. Eliminate distractions. What do I mean by this? Consider, did you see how much that Regent student was offered to go to Regent? A score of 158 got him over $100,000. You know what that means? Your LSAT, might actually be more important than your summer job. Okay? Think about it that way. Sometimes we have to do the cost-benefit analysis. So when I was working at Arby's, I could make maybe like $4,000, $5,000 in a summer. But when I first started with my LSAT, I was around a 150. What does that mean? Well, if I was going to Regent, I might not even get in for one, and if I did, I'd probably have to pay full tuition, which might be 40 grand a year. I'll tell you what, I'd have to work a lot of years at Arby's to pay that off. Okay? So what do I mean by this? Your LSAT might be actually more of a moneymaker for you than your job. So if you really put forth serious study, it might actually be better to not have a job. I'm giving you a pitch for your parents, by the way, right? This is when you can come back. No, Mom, I need to live in the basement. All right, here we go. All right, so this could be very beneficial because if you're getting over $100,000 in scholarships, this could mean that you could get a full ride. And by the way, if you're coming out of PCC, you're likely in very low or no debt. And if you're coming out of law school in no debt, you're killing it. I've talked to a lot of people. I talked with an attorney from Wake Forest the other day. Right? It's in the 40s. And he said, I wish I would have went to Regent and Liberty. Okay? He said, I'm a district attorney, I'm 35 years old, and I'm still in debt. And he goes, I work with people from Duke, and I didn't even know they were from Duke. It didn't matter. We're all doing the same stuff. We're all district attorneys. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that ranking doesn't matter, but what I am saying is that going through law school with minimal debt is a good thing. And by the way, Liberty and Regent are very generous with their scholarships. So it may be beneficial to forego a job in order to get the best LSAT score. It can be worth a ton of money. By the way, Law School Numbers is going to give you that. The ABA also forces schools to report how much average money they give out in scholarships. Know that material. It's going to really help you. Okay? Start a study schedule. By the way, I pulled this from 7 Sage. Maybe you guys heard of 7 Sage? There's a bunch of LSAT prep companies. All right, well, if you're into it, you've heard this. By the way, this is the LSAT. I plugged this in because the latest LSAT I could come up with was in August. So I found this August 14th. There's an LSAT being offered. Here's what the 7 Sage scheduled me to get ready by August 14th if we started today. I would have to do 56 hours a week over 3.7 months. That's what 7 Sage recommends in order to get ready for the LSAT. Now that's extreme, but I'll tell you what, it shows you the amount of work you're going to have ahead of you to get prepared for the LSAT. 7 Sage is telling you, in order to do that, you're going to have to put in 56 hours a week just to get ready by August 14th. So again, this is no joke. If you're planning on taking the LSAT, plan far in advance, okay? And here's the schedule. By the way, some of these courses are really great. One of the reasons why I like 7 Sage, you can pay for them on a monthly basis. So you can opt out at any time. 65, 70 bucks a month, I think. And you can take advantage of a large amount of their database. So, you know, take a look at that if you're considering it. I found 7 Sage to be a huge help. But they'll even set up a schedule for you. You just type in the date, and they'll tell you what you should be doing each day to get prepared. That can be really helpful if you have trouble self-motivating, right? It'll tell you, get this done in a day. Okay? Maybe we experience that with the online classes. Right? So, what is the LSAT composed of? I've mentioned this before. Logical reasoning. This is one of them, right? Logical reasoning. So here's an example of a logical reasoning question. All right. Daunting, right? Okay, so when a group of children who have been watching television programs that include acts of violence is sent to play with a group of children who have been watching programs that do not include acts of violence, the children who have been watching violent programs commit a much greater number of violent acts in their play than do the children who have been watching non-violent programs. Therefore, and by the way, that's the conclusion. Good. This is one of the things that you'll start doing. You'll start locating premises and conclusions. You'll start naturally doing this, right? But therefore, children at play can be prevented from committing violent acts by not being allowed to watch violence on television. Okay? That's the question. Down below, this is the stem. The argument in the passage assumes which one of the following. Okay? You can look through here. A, television has a harmful effect on society. Right? I'm not quite sure what they're talking about. I never saw society anywhere in there. That one's just like beyond the scope. Right? They might be saying something that's true, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the assumption. Right? You're looking for something that's assumed in the logical reasoning paragraph. B, parents are responsible for the acts of their children. Again, what? Right? I didn't necessarily see parents involved in there, so I'm not sure how that plays in. C, violent actions and passive observations of violent actions are not related. Okay, maybe, but here's the thing, that's kind of the opposite, right? Violent actions and passive observations of violent actions are not related. Wouldn't it be related if we were going to do this? Right, they kind of get you there because it's close, right? But actually need to reverse that. If it was passive observations of violence, then it would be true. Okay, so C is just like a reverse of what the answer is. And then D, there are no other differences between the two groups of children that might account for the difference in violent behavior. Ding, 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 ding. All right, correlation does not equal causation. How do we know that observing violence is what technically caused these kids to commit acts of violence? It could have been something else. Maybe those kids were hopped up on sugar. And we all know that sugar leads to violence. Okay? All right, maybe, all right, but they're just assuming that, right? They just tell you, oh, they've watched some violent videos, and then they go out and they're violent. Okay, we're just assuming that, though. How do we know that that actually caused that, right? There's the assumption. By the way, I looked this up. 7 Sage rated this a level 1 question. This is as easy as it gets. Be afraid. No, I'm just kidding. All right, this is a level 1 question. By the way, you should be able to answer this question in about 30 to 40 seconds. That's about the time you're going to need to answer this type of question. In fact, maybe even sooner. If I was looking at this question, I would hope to answer this probably in about 27 seconds. That's what I would be hoping for. Because by the way, when you get to level 5 questions, it might take you 3.5 minutes to go through it. Okay? So it can be a little daunting. By the way, they're going to try to trip you up because they want you to read all of this. One of the things you're going to get good at is spotting things quickly. All right, here's where the premises don't meet, and move on. Anyways, we're getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty, and if you haven't really been indoctrinated into this yet, it might be a little bit intimidating, but I promise you'll get used to it as you start to look at it. All right? But that's logical reasoning. Those are the types of questions. You'll see all kinds, must be true, strengthen questions, parallel logic questions. There's a lot. Number 2 is reading comprehension. And again, these are all worth 33% of your final score, with the logic games being slightly lower on the question count. Okay? So you're going to get an entire passage that you're going to have to read, and then you're going to have to answer questions upon it. Here's the bad part. This is like no other reading comprehension you've done. It's not like your SAT reading or even your ACT, because it's all logic-based. Okay? It's all logic-based. They're going to ask you for inferences. They're going to ask you for main points. But all of this is going to be logically based. Here's the reason why. They're going to ask you to read some science passage about glass melting at certain temperatures, and you're going to have no idea what they're talking about. But that's where they love to get you, because they want to see how good is your logic even when you don't understand the topic. Okay? So that's where they get you. By the way, one of the biggest struggles for reading comprehension is the time factor. We'll talk about that at the end, right? The time factor. Okay? So reading comprehension, you'll get these types of passages. Law, might be judicial impartiality and recusal, humanities, anthropology, and indigenous peoples, science, glass flow, and glass, there you go, glass flow and glass manufacturing. Yippee! All right? Everybody loves to read about those. By the way, I actually got a passage on my last LSAT that I taught, and it helped me 0. I actually knew the entire subject. It didn't help me at all. I hoped it would, but it didn't. Because again, it's testing your logic. So be afraid. Well, I shouldn't say be afraid. I'm speaking a lot of fear. That's not that bad, right? But be careful. If you find something really interesting, don't get locked into the fact that you find the topic really interesting, that you're not paying attention to the logical points, right? You'll see logical signposts down the road. By the way, the LSAT test makers, they'll take real articles, right? They'll pull from a science journal, and then they'll just re-edit the language. But hey, you can use that to your advantage. Because if you know that the LSAT test makers have language, they'll use certain words to tip off logical statements. And you'll start to spot those. Ah, they use the word since. That's an evidence word, and you'll be able to start looking at those. Okay? It's a learnable test. All right, and then finally you have the logical analysis. This is going to result in things like linear games, sequencing games, grouping games, and then just to torture you, they will combine all 3 of those in different fashions for ultimate torture. All right? So they'll mix these around. By the way, a lot of people call the logical analysis section logic games. It's sort of like a sick joke, like, ooh, we're playing a game. Okay? But by the way, this is your most improvable section. It will probably be the section that you start off as the worst section, but it's the section that most people, if they work hard enough, can get it up to a perfect score. In fact, I would recommend that if you're plateauing on reading comprehension and logical reasoning, to focus all of your efforts on logical analysis. That's what I found helped for me. That was my weakest section, logical analysis, and I found that with time and prep, I was able to improve that section a lot. Okay? So if you have time to devote to something, I would focus on that. These are these types of questions where it's like, exactly, 6 trade representatives negotiate a treaty. Bosniak, Blondie, Manley, Asada, Poirier. There are exactly 6 chairs evenly spaced around a circular table, and then you'll do, have you ever seen these types of logic games, right? You'll do this. Just in case you're in a courtroom someday, and the judge is like, in order to win this case, I want you to reorient the jury according by alphabetical name in a circle, and you'll be like, I've been prepared for this, okay? But they're trying to see your spatial reasoning, all right? They're trying to determine some various logical functions, but this is the most learnable section. I would recommend, and I was talking about this with Will earlier, I would recommend the Power Score LSAT Logic Games Bible if you can. By the way, you can pick up a book like this for about 40 bucks. You can even get this, I think, in the library. I would recommend getting your own copy, though. You can educate yourself. You don't necessarily have to get a $1,000 prep course. If you devote your time, and by the way, I've read this whole thing, and I'm sure people who have studied the LSAT have too, this thing is a lifesaver. It will lead you to the questions. It will show you how to do this. It's going to show you how to take logic and put it in a visual language. It's great, all right? So I would recommend the Power Score books. They do one for each section. They'll do it for the logical reasoning as well, and for the reading comprehension. But boy, to pick up this book is invaluable for help, so I would recommend doing that. By the way, I also have the one for, I love the Logic Games Bible, but I got the reading comp as well. I've been through this whole book as well, and I found them to be very, very helpful resources. Okay, so, all right, we're running out of time here. Anyways, I'm going to go over some of this really quickly, just because, let's talk a little bit, all right? So, but first of all, I would say this, you need to know your core logic. If you want to start off at a place, don't just start taking tests. After you've established your baseline score, stop. Because this is a mistake I made, because I had no idea what I was doing. I just sort of bumbled around and I wasted a lot of time. Just taking endless prep tests is not going to be very helpful. You need to start getting some of your basics down. You got to crawl a little bit before you can walk, before you can run. Okay? And so I spent too much time kind of taking tests, and I wasn't really improving. Okay? So know your core logic first. This is going to be really important. Being able to spot premises and conclusions. You're going to start seeing this in prep courses, right? You're going to get this in the Power Score books. If you get the chance to get those, pull those out. They're going to start walking you through some of these steps. But, for example, premise and conclusion, right? All dogs are adorable. Fluffers is a dog, therefore Fluffers is adorable. Okay? This is an example of premises and conclusions. The premises support the conclusion, and you get an end conclusion. By the way, you're going to see these types of questions on the LSAT. They're going to actually ask you, what's the premise? What's the conclusion? That's one of the reasons why you need to know this stuff. Because sometimes they'll just go right to the heart of it. What's the premise? What's the sub-conclusion? That one's scary, all right? So anyways, they'll ask you these sorts of questions. So you are going to have to be able to diagram these things. Because you're going to get questions like this, okay? By the way, the conclusion's not always at the end. One of the more tragic situations of life, all right? So you could reorient this. We know that Fluffers is adorable because he is a dog. And everyone knows that dogs are adorable. Right? The English language can confuse you in many ways, so the conclusion can actually come at the beginning. So you're going to need to start being able to spot what's the premise, what's supporting information, and what's the conclusion. Okay? By the way, here's an example. Some of this is just straight memorization. I pulled this off some prep courses. You can actually memorize words or phrases that are usually followed by the conclusion. So see, if you see consequently, therefore, as a result, so clearly, on down the line, you can pull out flashcards and just straight up memorize these. That way, it's rote memorization. One of the things that you're going to need to be able to do on the LSAT is to be able to recall this without wasting time. You don't want to be sitting there going, oh, this is the premise, ooh, this is the conclusion. You see it entails, and you're like, oh, I know that word. That usually means conclusion. Whoop, 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 whoop. You're done. Gotta be fast. Exactly like that, too, by the way. It helps if you go whoop, 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 just go through it. All right. But see, words or phrases usually followed by a premise, right? Owing to, as indicated by. So, if you pulled up something like this, quotas on, by the way, this is a straight LSAT question. Quotas on automobile imports to the United States should be eliminated. Then domestic producers would have to compete directly with Japanese manufacturers and would be forced to produce higher quality cars. Such competition would be good for consumers. If you had to take a guess, where do you think the conclusion is? Anyone want to go out on a limb? Yeah?
Well, it would appear like the last sentence is the conclusion.
It would appear, but no. It would in fact be quotas on automobile imports. By the way, thank you for guessing, right? No shame in this, okay? Quotas on automobile imports to the United States should be eliminated. Now, I put this one up there because it's kind of tricky. Because it looks like it, but such competition would be good for consumers. It doesn't really mean anything unless it's supporting something else, right? Such competition would be good for consumers. Therefore, quotas on automobile imports to the United States should be eliminated. Basically, you can actually take that first sentence and put it at the end. Right? That's a support for your first initial statement. But you see, you got to get practice to do these things. And by the way, you'll get there, right? It just takes some practice. Okay? So David, you failed to realize, Alice, that quotas on automobile imports are pervasive worldwide. Since Germany, Britain, and France have quotas, so should the United States. Now, this one's a little bit easier. Right? That one's also at the beginning as well for that one. It's you failed to realize, Alice. And then the second part is the premise, right? It's the supporting information. By the way, what's interesting about that question is the LSAT could ask they could ask a question about this in a number of different ways. Okay? They could ask you what's assumed. They could ask you what's the premise, what's the conclusion. They could hit you with anything. By the way, this is one of the reasons why you should always read the question stem first. What do they want you to know about the paragraph? Because you can get through this and you're like, oh, I know what they assumed, and it's like, what's the conclusion? Like, oh, I just wasted time reading that entire paragraph when all I needed to know was the conclusion. Okay. Anyways, we'll mention that. Sufficient and necessary. Yeah. Well, we might have to forgo this one. Again, I overestimated how long this would take. But I pulled some of these out because I think this is, again, basic logic. If Bob goes to the Commons, then Jim goes to the Commons. This is your classic sufficient but necessary. You're going to need to know this like the back of your hand. You're going to be able to need to turn phrases like that in order to do well here, right? So if Bob goes to the Commons, then Jim goes to the Commons. So let's ask ourselves a couple of questions. If Bob goes to the Commons, then where is Jim? The Commons, right? Pretty easy, right? If Bob goes to the Commons, then Jim's in the Commons. We get that. Next question. If Jim goes to the Commons, where's Bob? I see Will going, I don't know. You're exactly right. We don't know, right? Because if Jim goes to the Commons, that's the necessary function of that statement. It doesn't have any relationship to Bob. It only triggers if Bob goes to the Commons. So if Jim's in the Commons, hey, Bob might be passed out in his dorm room. We don't know, right? The only way we know that Jim gets tripped into the Commons is if Bob goes. But Jim could go there on his own. That's what that logic will tell us. And by the way, the LSAT, everything with their premises is always true. They never just lie to you at some point, right? Everything, they always assume that everything is true about this. Yes, sir?
Mr. Trout, did you do much with positives?
Yes,
when you
I'm
were
actually going to get
Great.
that right here.
Super.
Yep. So if Jim goes to the Commons, where is Bob? All right? How about if Bob does not go to the Commons? What do we know about Jim? By the way, it's still nothing. Again, it doesn't trigger anything. If Bob doesn't go to the Commons, okay, could Jim still go to the Commons, by the way? Yeah, he could go to the Commons, okay, because it's the necessary phrase, not the sufficient. All right, how about this? If Jim does not go to the Commons, does that tell us anything about Bob? Ah, I see some of you shaking your head because you are a wise student, as Dr. Reese pointed out, of the contrapositive, because we can know something logically about this. If Jim does not go to the Commons, what does that mean for Bob? It means Bob can't go to the Commons, because if Bob's in the Commons, then Jim has to be in the Commons. It doesn't work, all right? Now, this is all English, and it gets us confused. This is one of the reasons why LSAT test preps will help you put this in a visual language. Because, by the way, it's even confusing when I say it. I'm saying it sounds like word salad. You're going to start learning how to represent this in smaller forms. I put it here, right? If Bob, so let me get my little laser pointer here. If Bob goes to the Commons, then Jim goes to the Commons. This down here, as Dr. Reese pointed out, is the contrapositive. All you have to do is put this one on the other side of the arrow, put this one on the other side of the arrow, and negate both. You always negate both. That means that if Jim is not in the Commons, Bob can't be in the Commons. How do we know this? Because if Bob's in the Commons, then Jim has to be in the Commons. Okay? So we know that to be true. But see how we created information from something we originally didn't know? Right? We originally didn't know that. But now we do, based on that. Okay? So that's the contrapositive. Now we know. that if Jim's not in the Commons, we know Bob can't be there. Because Jim would have to be there if Bob was there. By the way, that's kind of a hard way to visualize it. I came up with one that's a little bit more applicable to us, and I think makes more sense, because sometimes the logical abstraction gets confusing. How about this? Sufficient and necessary. If you live in Pensacola, then you live in Florida. Is that true? Right? Yeah. If you live in Pensacola, then you live in Florida. But let me ask you something. If you live in Florida, do you live in Pensacola? No. Can you see how that works? It's harder to visualize when it's Bob and Jim. But you see it in that realm, right? It's sufficient. If you live in Pensacola, you're always in Florida. Unless we secede or something like that. Heaven forbid that ever happen. All right? Right? If you live in Pensacola, then you live in Florida. Okay? I think that's an easier way to visualize it. So, if you don't, so let's take the contrapositive. What's the contrapositive? If you don't live in Florida, then you don't what? You don't live in Pensacola. You can't live in Pensacola if you're not in Florida. You see how that works? Make sense? How about the ultimate torture? The LSAT will do this to you. You've seen 1. Now try 6 combined. All right, or 5. If Bob goes to the Commons, then Jim goes to the Commons. If Jim goes to the Commons, Rick and Larry. I just wrote this, by the way, today. Rick and Larry go to the Commons. If Larry goes to the Commons, Miranda does not go to the Commons. If Amanda goes to the Commons, then Bob goes to the Commons. And Miranda goes to the Commons, Hunter goes to the Commons. And by this point, I don't know why anyone wants to go to the Commons. This is just confusing, all right? But here's the cool part, and LSAT Prep will help you do this. You don't have to get this giant English word salad. You can break this down. Boom. If A, right, if Amanda goes to the Commons, then we know Bob goes to the Commons. And if Bob goes to the Commons, we know Jim goes to the Commons. This is much easier to see, is it not? Right? Very easy. Visual language. Now, we know that if Jim goes to the Commons, Rick goes to the Commons. And Larry goes to the Commons. And we know that if Larry goes to the Commons, Miranda does not go to the Commons. Putting it in language. Much easier to see, much faster. Okay? Now, I also give you a last statement here. If Miranda goes to the Commons, Hunter goes to the Commons. Now, here's something that's cool. We can do this with our contrapositive again. What do we know? By the way, we can do contrapositives on all of these. I wouldn't recommend it because it takes a long time. But one of the things you'll get good at is you can spot these during the test. You'll say, ooh, if I rearrange this, I can help myself out. So we know something. If Miranda goes, then Hunter goes. But we know that if Larry goes, Miranda doesn't go. Remember, if you take contrapositive, you flip both and negate both. So then that would become Miranda goes, Larry does not. But now we have another trigger. If Miranda goes and Larry doesn't, Miranda goes and Hunter doesn't, we can combine those together to get a new piece of information. We know that if Miranda goes, Hunter goes, and Larry doesn't go. The LSAT loves to test you on stuff like this. They'll say, what happens if Miranda's going? And the answer might be that Larry doesn't. Now, usually the LSAT's actually not that easy. It gets complicated, but you'll get better at it. Okay? But here's something that we can learn. By the way, this is a word salad. If I were to try to ask you questions about this, it'd be impossible. But how about with our new format? Let me ask you a question. If Amanda goes to the Commons, what happens to Miranda? Now, if I were to ask you based on this, it'd be hard to know. But take a look at our visual language. If Amanda goes, Bob goes. If Jim goes, Larry goes. And if Larry goes, Miranda can't go. So here's what we can do. We can follow this direct line. If the LSAT asked me, if Amanda goes to the Commons, what happens to Miranda? I'd say Miranda can't go. I don't need to look through all this confusing English language because I put it in a visual format. Right? So I know that if Amanda goes, Miranda's not going. See how that can help you? This is why LSAT Prep is a must. English is confusing. You got to be able to represent it visually so that you can move through these things very quickly. This is just one piece of the puzzle. Okay? You're also going to get questions like strengthen and weaken, assumption questions, must be true and false. And one of the reasons why we're taking a broad overview because we don't have time to go through all of it. Right? You can see how much it takes to get ready. Question stems. I've mentioned this before. Always read them first. Okay? Because again, the argument might ask you for assumes. It might say, hey, what information about this strengthens the passage? What weakens the passage? What's parallel logic? For all of you LSAT vets, parallel logic is the bane of my existence. Right? They'll give you some logical statements, and then they'll give you a bunch of parallel logical statements that you have to see if they match together. Ugh, talk about a time suck, right? That'll just waste all your time. It can be vicious. Okay? So again, you can see that there. If the argument asks us to assume, then we don't necessarily need to look for the conclusion on a statement like this. We would immediately look for the assumption. Because then we would know. So you always read the stem first. Sometimes we can get caught up in reading the initial passage. Okay, final tips. Blind review. By the way, if you take one thing out of this, take home the blind review. What do I mean by this? You're going to have to check your pride at the door to do blind review. Okay? Here's what blind review is. When you start taking a full LSAT test, you're going to come to the very end of the test. And what's your first desire when you come to the end of the test? What do you want to know? You want to know your score, right? I want to know, right? You want to know. But you don't want to know, okay? Here's why you don't want to know. Before you submit that test, because you've taken it under time conditions, you want to go back through and examine every question and see if you would have changed the answer if you had more time. This is how you learn. This is how you see whether your time self is being hurt by the time as compared to yourself when you understand the text. It is one of the hardest things, all right, to do, because our pride wants to just know what our score is immediately, but don't. You will ruin your blind review. Go back through every single question. Groups like 7 Stage will allow you to do this. They'll have a blind review time and go back through, see what questions you changed. Often your blind review will be several points higher than your regular. I guarantee you this will help raise your score, because now you'll know with 100% certainty this is what I would have answered. It wasn't just the time crunch. And then what happens is after you've blind reviewed that and you've discovered, all right, here's what I would have answered in the time crunch, you'll see how many questions you missed. If you missed it and you thought you were 100% sure that was the answer, now you really want to know. I changed in blind review and got it right. That was just a timing issue. But this question, I really thought I was right. I 100% thought this was the answer. By the way, blind review might take you 2 to 3 times longer than what it took you to take the test. That's hard to do psychologically, but do it. It's very beneficial. Take less prep tests, blind review more. I promise. It's helpful. Know the test, then manage your timing. By the way, get your core logic down before you start timing your tests and stressing yourself out. Okay? That's a good first step. Know your logic, know how to get those things accomplished, then start putting yourself under timing conditions. And by the way, you need to know your time frames. You do not want to go into the test being lackadaisical and then hope that you can bring down your time frames. Okay? Don't take too many practice tests. As I said before, taking lots of practice tests is not necessarily the surest way to get the best score. Okay? Sometimes it's actually better to take less, blind review, and review more. Okay? And then practice under test conditions, by the way. You're going to take this on a tablet or a computer. Take it in those conditions. In fact, if you can take it wherever you think you're going to have to take it, so they're going to let you maybe take it in your room or in the library, practice in the library. Because familiar surroundings, they show that your recall comes back in those situations. So if you know you're going to take it in the library, practice in the library. It's going to help you. Okay? And then relax and have fun. Just kidding, you're going to die. No, it's not that bad. All right. Right, so take it easy. All right, one of the things that I did the first time I took the test is I started like panicking myself. All right? I was like, oh my goodness. My whole life rides on this. Hey, if I don't get a good score, then I'll go downhill, and then I won't be able to get into law school, and then I'll be on the side of the street begging, talking about how I should have studied more for my LSAT. Ah! All right, don't do that. All right, take a deep breath. It'll be all right. You can only do what you can do during the test. Eliminate all distractions when you're in the test. Do the best that you can. By the way, when I first took the test, I knew that I botched a section, but I'm so glad that I continued to do my best throughout it because I ended up getting a better score than what I thought. I thought I had bombed it. But I just pushed that out of my mind because I said I can only do what I can do now. Always remember that during your testing situation. Only do what you can do now, examine everything later. By the way, lots of groups, this is the last thing I have. There's lots of different examples here of things that you can do. By the way, this is 7 Stage. They have analytics. I love this, by the way. I pulled this directly because I have their course. I pulled it up for you guys just so you can see this. You can see your analytics based on the test. So the more tests you put in, the more they'll analyze your performance and give you feedback on what to improve, your weak areas. That's really helpful. You don't even need a tutor to do this. Okay? They will tell you exactly what you're missing, what your strong points are, and where you can work on things. Right? You can see this. It'll tell you your worst and your best. You can see there, logic games. That's where I struggle more than any other section. Right? They'll give you the question difficulty. I love this. If you got nailed on a question and you're like, holy cow, and then you look and you're like, oh yeah, 90% of people miss this, you can feel comforting, right? Oh, that was a level 5 question. Of course I missed that, right? They'll even weight the questions and tell you how hard they are and the percentage of people in this course that got it right. So you'll kind of know where you're falling, okay? And then they'll even do analytics here where they'll tell you your priorities, what you should focus on, what specific types of questions you specifically struggle with. I love this, by the way. That analytics was so helpful for me. I got to see what my specific weak points are. Because all of you are going to have different experiences studying for the LSAT. My way is not going to be your way. You're going to be stronger in some sections and weaker than others. So find good analytics that will help you improve your specific score. All right, that's all I got. Sorry, that was a lot of time there, but I just kind of wanted to unload on you. All right, all the things that I could do. I don't know if we're out of time or anything like that for question and answer. It might be too late, but
We have time probably for a couple.
Yeah, let's show our appreciation to Mr. Trout for coming. So Mr. Trout has agreed to stick around for a few minutes and share some announcements before he leaves. So does anyone have any questions right now off the dome? Anybody? I have a question for you. I know I would say there's 3 ways to study. You can do like totally independent with just some books. You could do 7 Sage and pay for that, or you could pay for a tutor, right?
yeah.
Do you think there's one that's more beneficial than the other? Or
Depends on how much money you have.
Okay.
As I said before, by the way, if you're getting $100,000 in scholarships, it's not the end of the world to pay for a $1,000 prep course. Truly. It feels like if you're a penny pincher like me, you're like, oh, I don't want to drop $1,000, but it can be really helpful. Okay? Because again, if you're going to get $100,000 in scholarships, $1,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to what you could be getting. But I will say this, you can self-study yourself to a better score. Okay? You don't have to have the prep course to do it. Now, I personally preferred 7 Stage. I love the analytics because I never had a tutor. I figured all this out myself over hours of mind-numbing pain, okay? But what I found is I love the analytics on 7 Stage, and that's why I did it. Oh, by the way, for logic games, they've cracked logic games. Because here's one of the things, and by the way, this is just a tip for you. This will help you get a perfect score eventually on logic games. If you do not get a logic game in the time that you should, if you can't get your logic game done in under 6 minutes or 6 minutes and 30 seconds, depending on how hard the game is, sometimes it might take you 9 minutes. By the way, 7 Stage will tell you how long it should have taken you to go, which I love. They'll give you a time frame. You take that game, you print it out 10 times, and you keep doing that game until you get it under the time frame. And then you keep copies of that game. Logic games are memorizable. A lot of the same patterns and functions will happen again, so keep drilling those things until you get a lower score. Or you miss less, is what I should say, because it's almost like golf. You want to miss less and less. You want to get less minus questions, is usually how they refer to it. But that's a key to cracking logic games. I know students here that have gotten, you actually, got to about what? Did you?
Well, I started on logic games, I think I started, and I would get like less than half right. Less than half right in the section. And then when Region came, I got, I think, 3 on them.
That's incredible. See?
In a month.
Yeah.
And I'm not super smart. I'm like a little smart, but I'm not super smart. So if I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so logic games is the section you can improve probably the most. And you can get it down to 3 to 0. That's usually the elite level range. If you're getting down to 3 to 0, that is a huge boost to your LSAT score, especially since it's now worth 33%. By the way, it used to only be worth, it's 25. Now it's worth 33. So since logic games is beatable, it's a great way to boost your score.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
What law school do you plan to attend?
Good question. Good question. I'll apply, see what I get. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm from the West, so I wouldn't mind going to like University of Idaho. They don't have a tremendous LSAT. Yeah, right. They require about a 153 is about their median. So that would be a good target score. But I'm considering schools in Florida because of in-state tuition. But we'll see. I'd kind of like to go where the mountains are instead of the, we got the Olive Garden parking lot. It's about the steepest elevation. But.
I live in the mountains, so I can appreciate it.
Where are you from?
South Dakota.
Good. I like that, right? Yeah.
Is there any wisdom in just skipping over one that is a level 5 and just guessing those and going on to gain time?
Usually if you have a level 5 question, it is good to put those towards the end if you can. It depends on your specific study method, but yeah, if you're finding that you're spending over 3 minutes on a question, you need to eventually click it and move on because you could be missing a low-hanging fruit. That's a really easy question. And by the way, every question is going to really bump your score. It's crazy. You get 2 questions right, that's a point up. And a point up could be thousands of dollars of scholarship money. So it's a big deal. Not to put pressure on you, but you don't want to sit there and like print it out. Like, oh, I'm going to answer this level 5 question. Woohoo, I got it right. And I missed 4 level 1 questions because I didn't get to them. Boo. Okay, don't do that, all right? Yeah, you want to take all the low-hanging fruit that you can. Any other questions that you have? It's a daunting prospect, but you guys can do it. It's really doable. Right? If I can do it, you can, and I'm sure there's many of you that will get much higher scores. So, and I hope to see that. It's great to see. So,
all right. Well, thank you, Mr. Trout, for coming out and sharing all that information with us. I have one super, very vital, important announcement to share with you guys, and that is to please follow us on Instagram. We have information regarding future meetings, LSAT and law school related content, and also we post our replays of these meetings. So if you weren't able to make it out to the first one, head over to our page, and then that little TV icon right there in the middle, well, that's how many followers we have. We're trying to get that up a little bit. So you can follow us, trying to get to 30 by the end of the semester. That's the goal.
Go double at 40.
Double? Okay, we're going for 40.
It's a tough goal.
We're going for 40. We're going to aim high, just like we should with our LSAT
Go up
students.
20.
If we double it,
Yeah.
if we double, Mr. Trout will give us a free tutorial session on the LSAT. How about
Yeah,
that?
perfect. Yeah, so if you did miss our last meeting, you can go to our page and then click on the little TV icon. There's our panel discussion we did with Elizabeth regarding her application process. That's all we have for you guys tonight. Thank you so much for coming out, and I hope to see you guys next semester. Thank you.